Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts ArtBreak at Home. Today is August 10th, and we are thrilled that today's topic is Printmaking and Pandemic Part 2 with Deborah Matson. So if you were able to join us last January, Deborah Matson did Printmaking and Pandemic Part 1. And it was so interesting that we wanted to continue the fun. Some quick KIA news before we get started. Upcoming events. This Saturday, if you know any young art detectives in your life who would like to join us for our final virtual Art Detectives, August 11th at 11 a.m., we will be doing Toy Boat, the book by Randall DeSev and Lauren Long. We'll be looking at books in the collection of the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, and then we will be making a little boat that can float in water. And our next virtual event is a Thursday evening Artful Evening, August 19th at 6 p.m. It is with the art conservator Barry Bauman, and it is on conservation of paintings. August 24th, we'll be joined by Emily Wolsheed from the Kirk Newman Art School as well, and she will be talking on evolution of an artist, and that is also virtual. August 28th, we are going to have an exhibition opening in the Children's Interactive Gallery. It's called It's a David Small World. So if you're familiar with the local author illustrator David Small, it is original works from his personal collection, which has been donated to the West Michigan area show. Donated to Western Michigan University, and it's part of a Kalamazoo-wide celebration of David Small and Sarah Stewart's works. So you can see works from 5 of his books on display in the Interactive Gallery, and you can also see works from both David and Sarah at the Book Arts Center, the Waldo Library, the Richmond Center for Art, and Kalamazoo Public Library. We are also going to be so sad to say goodbye to the West Michigan Area Show. It closes on September 12th. And if you haven't yet had a chance to come and see it, please do, and vote for your People's Choice Award. And also, you can see a work by our speaker today, Deborah Matson. She has got a work in the West Michigan Area Show, which won the award for alternative media from Ninth Wave Studio. Our first in-person art break since 2020 will be September 7th. And it will be with 2 speakers from the Kalamazoo People's Food Co-op on local sustainability in conjunction with the upcoming Jenny Ruffner Reforestation of the Imagination show. That will be in person, but just as a note, the next art break after that will be virtual again. And then after that, all events will be in person, including Art Detectives with David Small and Sarah Stewart on September 11th. So if you know any young artists in your life who might enjoy Imogene's Antlers or Catch That Cookie or any of the books by David and Sarah, we'll be reading The Quiet Place and creating accordion books or mini books for kids. And if you are a big fan of David and Sarah and you want to come, you don't have to be an art detective, you can come too. And finally, the Kirk Newman Art School registration is open for the fall. There are some really great classes out there. If you've never taken printmaking, Deborah Matson teaches beginning printmaking. She's also doing a Chinese thread book workshop, which I personally am going to sign up for, and I'm very excited. The Kalamazoo Institute of Arts is open Wednesday through Sunday. Currently, Wednesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., Sunday, 12 to 4. Finally, before I turn everything over, please save your questions for the end. So if you happen to have a question that you really want to know, you don't want to forget your question, you can type it into the chat and I will read it to Deb at the end, or you can make a little note to yourself. Please remain on mute for the duration of the program until we get to the Q&A at the end. And that is all I have to say. So we are so thrilled to be welcoming Deborah Matson back, Printmaking and Pandemic Part 2. Deb is the chair of the printmaking department at the Kirk Newman Art School, and we're so lucky that she has made time for us today. So welcome, Deborah.
Thanks, Jessica. I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen and only the artwork that I have on my screen. Is that what you have, Jessica? Okay, good. Very good. Well, again, I appreciate people coming back to learn more about printmaking in pandemic. It is definitely a part of the time we're living in. You know, we're living through a pandemic now. I was thinking that one of the upsides of seeing artwork about the pandemic through history is it's a reminder that we're not the only human beings who have lived through this. It's kind of really been, unfortunately, a situation that has kept recurring throughout history. So we get to see different artists, how they react to it. And remember, as I mentioned, that printmaking is considered the democratic art, and then it's just not about doing one painting and having it be somewhere where only a few people can see it. The very nature of printmaking is to share art and to get information out there. So whether it's information about pandemics or whether it's a reaction to a pandemic, what people want to say about it, throughout history, printmakers have taken that opportunity to make artwork about the situation so that what they think about it or what they know about it can go out to as many people as possible. It's a way to communicate. So if you remember, we ended up last time with these 16th century woodcuts of two of the patron saints of the plague. In other words, saints you could pray to for protection from a plague or healing from a plague. Saint Sebastian on your left, the fact that he's being shot full of arrows is kind of symbolic of how plagues and illness can just, it's like they come up out of nowhere, just like an arrow falling out of the sky, especially back in these times, Middle Ages and Renaissance, where people didn't know that much about contagion, and it just really felt random to them to get sick. So Saint Sebastian and then Saint Roque on the right during this Renaissance time were very famous patron saints of illness and pandemic. And you'll see them recur even in later art, especially Saint Sebastian. So I'm going to move on. I need to click my screen. All right. I put up these three names last time, and this is kind of where we started. These are, you'll see, this is Jacques Caillot, Francisco Goya, and Otto Dich. From three different times of history, very famous printmakers, and they're all famous for their willingness to be very graphic presenters of the negative side of human life, especially war and the pestilence which came with it. You'll find throughout history that very often there were wars, then what followed was illness because of the disorganization of society, and plagues, and all three of these men experienced that as well. So the first printmaker you saw there was Jacques Caillot. He was an etcher, which means that he worked on very small copy plates. This one that you see was probably just like 5 by 7, possibly smaller, that's inches. This printmaking method works, and it became very popular around the 15 and 1600s, especially in France. The metal plate is covered with a waxy substance called a ground, and then with a very fine needle, the printmaker can draw very, very exacting detail into it. As you see here, especially when you consider that this plate is 5 by 7, you see Saint Sebastian in the center. You see the arrows that are going into him, falling around him. Let me go back and say with this printmaking method, once you've drawn your picture into that ground on the plate, it's put into acid, and the acid bites into the plate where it's not protected. That is, where you've scraped away. If you look at this plate, you'll see that it's very faint in the background and it gets darker as it comes forward. That's atmospheric perspective. You see it in a lot of realistic art. But in this particular type of printmaking, etching, how that's accomplished is the plate that has been drawn on will be put in the acid. You can pull it out, You can put some little extra, we call it stop out. You can put a little varnish on things that you don't want to etch anymore. You can put it in the acid again. You can take it out. So you get this cumulative burning away of the acid. And that's how Caillot and other etchers get this atmospheric look of things that are very faint and things that are very dark. What's dark has just been an acid longer. So when the plate is cleaned and the entire plate is printed, you get an image like this. And Caillot was famous for having all this detail, all this historical detail. People, if you look closely, people are doing different things in different scenes. This was his style. He was trying to bring in events so that people could relate to them in their own time. So this was the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, was a very ancient event, but he's placing it into the current day so people can relate to it. You might remember I talked about a pest bill. That was during the Middle Ages, and going forward, a special printed piece of paper that people would carry around as a protection from the plague. And we think that this is also a pest bill. It was something that was printed. Remember, printmaking allows you to make a lot of copies back before there was Xerox, before there was computer printers. This is how you made copies, and then these could be sold or dispersed, and anyone who could buy one or could afford it would have this special piece of paper that would help them feel more secure. Again, this is from Caillot's series, The Miseries of War. The entire series, a very graphic presentation of literally the miseries of war. Parts of that can be very disturbing. And again, because the plates are so small, they're like, 3 by 7. You don't always see all the grisly detail in them. But if you look closely, here you see there's soldiers that have been wounded in battle. And you also see off to the side soldiers and people who, because of the war, have just become very sick, especially in that lower right-hand corner. So again, another printmaking making his commentary about the miseries of life, whether it's war, whether it's the illness that accompanies war. Moving on, we're still kind of into that era where the bubonic plague is the big illness. It keeps coming back. It came to London. And again, this is an engraving. It's an intaglio technique similar to etching. This is by John Dunstall. And again, this is more of like a visual commentary on everything that's happening in London at the time. So we see printmaking used as an illustrative medium to show what's happening in London during this time. And now even in our day, we can look back and see these scenes. Usually printmakers doing this type of work or of this era, they're trying to make it as realistic as possible because they're feeling they have a duty to present this information. It might be like a photojournalist in our day. In these previous times, it was artists and specifically printmakers, because they could be the ones making the copies. We're trying to show realistic portrayals of what was really going on at the time. And that means that we, 500 years later, can look back and see what it was like for them. Again, another engraving of the plague in London, 1665. It's just an illustration of the bodies being brought out. Again, kind of depressing imagery, but the fact that this artwork was made then means that we now can look back and we can relate to this. We've all seen the photos now of the corpses being burnt in India, or the bodies being collected outside of hospitals in major world cities. So we look at this and we realize we can make that connection to art. Times are bad now, but we're not the only ones. How did they deal with it? They kept on living, and we can do that too. So that's one of the good things about art, I think, is that cross-century relation that we have with other peoples. What you see here are broadsides. Right around this time of the plague, the big plagues in late medieval, early Renaissance Europe was when printmaking and typesetting was really coming into its own. And people, as you may know, they could start printing newspapers, Bibles, books, and also information like this. On the left, you have these different bills that, by bills, it's like a report. It's not, they're not sending you a bill. It's a reportage of, they would print lists of everyone who had died in London at that time. So you could know if it was someone you knew, you could be aware of their passing. And then here on the right, you see another broadside, all sorts of information. This is a little harder to read. It says, London's, Lord have mercy upon us. And then sometimes these broadsides, they might have different prayers for a cure, who had died, what the statistics were, maybe some medical information if they had it. So this was another way that printmaking could inform and aid people during these times, giving them the information, giving them maybe some glimmer of hope of what they could say or do or pray during this situation. I wanted to include some images that weren't just European plagues happening. And this is an engraving done by an American artist. It is. There was no artist listed for this, but this was an illustration by a 1700s, an illustrator, an engraver who was showing the smallpox pandemic among indigenous peoples of North America. So it goes to show that throughout the world, these illnesses happen. Sometimes there's a moral component about, well, where did this illness come from? How is it passed on? But just going to show that artists of all times were interested in plague and pandemic wherever it was happening. And here we see this kind of depiction of misery of indigenous peoples of North America suffering from smallpox. Also moving into some Japanese work. This work, like most Japanese prints, is a woodblock print. Every color you see is a different block, and then they're all printed one at a time on top of each other. So you can really appreciate the precision of the wood carving here, that all the colors line up where they're supposed to line up to get one cohesive print. Smallpox plagues happened recurrently in Japan throughout the 1600s and 1700s, and very similar to the Western approach of making artwork about it and maybe having pieces of paper that could even offer you some kind of mystical protection. That was done in Japan. They had a belief in the smallpox demon. So this is what you're seeing here, especially the figure clad in red, and you can see he's carrying someone away who has the pox on him. And then you have these samurai warriors who are depicted as kind of being able to fight these demons away. There's another one here. I'm sorry, my own screen is a little obscured here, but the samurai again is fighting away that smallpox demon that's in the ocean, trying to keep it from attacking the population. So not just in the Western world are these things happen, and artists and printmakers responding to them. I'd like to move on to the artist Francisco Goya. He was one of, if you remember, one of the first slides I showed. It was the second one. This is a painter. He was a court painter. You might be familiar with some of his works. He did a lot of court portraits. He also did some artwork that got him in trouble, like the 3rd of May. He had a lot of political ideas that he put into his prints. He was very often obsessed with darkness, with the negative things that happen in human life and how to portray them. And so we have included in his work a lot of things having to do with plagues and illness that were happening in society at the time. So I'm just gonna flip through here. Here, this is a painting he did, and this is a infirmary for people who are suffering from the plague. So you can see here the various bodies and their illness and how they're all kind of encased in this darkness. He was very, I wouldn't say obsessed, but very preoccupied with these images of darkness and death. This is a self-portrait of Goya himself and a doctor that helped him in one of his illnesses. And he painted this kind of as a tribute to this doctor that saved his life at a time when he was extremely ill. Those are paintings. I'm now going into some etchings of Goya that are part of his Miseries of War series, much like Jacques Caillot had the Miseries of War series. Goya did the same thing. So here we have not war so much, but one of the side effects of war is the illness that comes. You have sick children, people who are dying, and he portrays all this really unflinchingly so people can be aware. Just communicating, again, his Miseries of War is a huge set of plates, a huge printmaking work, and he didn't hold anything back. It's like everything he thought about it, he just had vignette after vignette about this is what happens, and this is what happens, and then, of course, illness happens and spreads. Another one here. This was happening too during the Peninsular War. So these are from the early 1800s. It was at the time when Bonaparte was coming through Spain. So that gives you kind of a time frame. And again, just the portrayal of illness and misery and soldiers not really caring. It's just like, it's just a part of their lineage, you know, this is just what happens to these people. Too bad is kind of the attitude. Moving into the 1800s, later 1800s, one of the most feared illnesses was cholera. People did not yet understand how cholera spreads. There was still a lot of thought that it was a lung disease, that you spread it through breathing bad air. Even Florence Nightingale believed that if we could just clean up the air, you know, people wouldn't be getting cholera. A lot of research was then done during the time. It's a waterborne illness. And these are some engravings done mid-century London, again. On the right, we have Death's Dispensary. That's the polluted fountain. Once it gets into the groundwater from which people are drinking, there's going to be mass death. There was mass death in London. And here again, you have similar like those Dance of Death, excuse me, engravings, the wood engravings you saw from the medieval period. You have that masked death figure playing as music while people die. And up in the upper left corner, you have the musicians that are abandoning the situation in disgust. So again, printmakers responding to what is happening, letting their emotions be known, trying to get out some information. You know, beware of where you get your drinking water because that's how you get sick. What you're seeing here is a new form of printmaking that became very popular in the 1800s, although it was developed in the 1700s. This is lithography. Lithography became very popular. It was probably the main means of printing illustrations right into the 20th century until more digital work became popular. And you may have heard of off-plate lithography. It's the same technology for printing information and colored imagery off of plates, whether it's stone, which was originally done, or metal plates or plastic plates. Because lithography allowed artists to draw directly on stones with a more crayon-like tool instead of having to work in incisions or carving. You could get a lot more natural, painterly-like effects. And because lithography became very easy to print, when it was done on aluminum plates, you could roll it right through drums. It became more of a technical behind fine art printmaking technique. There could be this mass insemination of information, whether on the right, this is a more emotional image of diphtheria just coming right up and seizing this child by the throat. And on the other side, it's more of a medical illustration of what a throat looks like when diphtheria attacks you. And near the end of the 1800s was when vaccinations started to be more publicly accepted and used. And artists could use illustrations like this to show people, you know, be careful, maybe you should get vaccinated, maybe you should be aware of this illness and what you can do to stop its spread, because if you don't, this is what your throat is gonna look like, this is what's gonna happen to your child. So printmaking became very much, again, disseminating information, oftentimes perhaps with an emotional plea attached, and lithography made this very easy. I might add, you can still learn lithography at the KIA. We teach it still. Stone, aluminum, and plastic plate. So any printmaking method I talk about in this talk is something that's still accessible at the Kirk Newman Art School. Moving into the 20th century, I'm sure you recognize this image by Edvard Munch. He was a Norwegian artist. He also is very famous for his portrayal of the dark sides of life, whether it be disappointment in love, whether it be death, whether it be illness. And this image, The Scream, is his famous portrayal of just the angst and anxiety of life. And it can be universal. Whatever is going wrong, you can look at this image and know that someone else knows how you feel. This is a woodcut. Edvard Munch was a very innovative woodcut artist for his day. He was going beyond just doing very careful wood engravings and woodcuts that were meant to be very illustrative. And he became very emotive and expressionist in his woodcut work and in his painting as well, as you can see in this woodcut. This is another woodcut by Edvard Munch, and you can see that he did add some color to it. He probably added that with paint later. Again, this is an image of people grieving death. And again, very much the sadness and the oppression and the darkness. This does show some of his innovation. I mentioned that he probably added some watercolor, but you can also see here how in order to print color, because color is very difficult in printmaking, I talked about the Japanese artists would have to carve a colored block for every single color. Munch decided that he would have areas of color in his prints, but he would just cut the wood out like a jigsaw puzzle, and then he could ink each one separately and then put them back together and then do the whole print. So you can see here the portions of the blocks he's cut out to print areas of color. And then over that, he could print the lithograph drawing of in this case called the vampire. So again, it's an innovative combination of techniques. It's adding the color with the jigsaw puzzle woodblock, and then over that printed paper, printing his lithograph. These are all techniques we can still practice today. Another lithograph by Munch of a dying child. Again, his preoccupation with illness. And this is Edvard Munch himself. He painted his self-portrait, and this is during the Spanish influenza pandemic that happened approximately 100 years ago. You've probably heard a lot about Spanish influenza pandemic. I've been reading about our current COVID pandemic and how we're following that pandemic by about a century. Edvard Munch got very ill. He did survive, but this is a painting that he did of himself. And again, you see it's very expressionist, and all those greens, they just kind of give you that sickly feel. He doesn't look healthy, and there's just that green pallor overall. So this is a very to the moment image, piece of artwork. You know, I got sick with this illness. This is what it feels like. And this is another painting that he did during that time. Again, you see that green pallor happening. This next print that you see, this is an etching, and I'm going to be talking about another artist now, and this is moving, again, this is in the 20th century, and again, I'm talking about a time period, a century, almost exactly a century earlier. I've been talking about Egon Schiele, who is a Viennese artist, famous for draftsmanship, for expressionist drawings and prints and paintings of people, very often from the underworld, the seedier side of Vienna, self-portraits, but also some of his wealthier patrons. This is just an example of his line work. You can see that it is almost a kind of minimalist approach. He just has some lines here, but the lines he puts down are extremely descriptive. This was a gift that he had. And this is a portrait of one of his patrons. So here again, Egon Schiele, 1890 to 1918. You notice he did not live long. He did die of the Spanish influenza. So did his wife, who was pregnant at the time. The child you see here is a hoped-for child. And this is a family portrait he made looking forward to the future. Sadly, it was a future that didn't happen because of the pandemic of 1918, 1919. Another portrait of someone who is ill by Schiele, and this is his wife, Edith. This portrait was made of her the day before she died. And she was dying of the Spanish influenza. I'm going to go, if I can go back. This is among the last portraiture Schiele did, because soon after this, he also died of the pandemic. And because he was such a gifted artist, he left so much work, so much amazing work in such a short amount of time. You know, you can, as with all artists that die young, you wonder what else would they have done? You know, how would they have evolved and changed? And what else would they have had to say to the world? Okay. So I'm going to move into a different era now and talk about a different pandemic, 20th century also, the AIDS pandemic. I'm going to be showing you a series of silk screen prints that were made by a collective called ACT UP. During the 1980s. As some of you might remember, when the AIDS pandemic started, it was very much in the beginning a subject matter that people didn't want to talk about because it was considered a homosexual's disease and no one else had to worry about it. And when people started dying by the droves, the gay community decided that they needed to communicate. They needed to start getting information out. Again, printmaking allows you to disseminate information. It allows you to make statements and put them up all over the place. So most of these posters were screen printed. It was a workshop by Keith Haring, was one of the first members. Avram Finkelstein was probably the main member. And they made these posters and they put them up around New York City to get people thinking and talking. and also to encourage people who thought they were ill to get tested, to be aware of what's happening, to make behavioral changes that might curtail the spread of the disease. So you're going to see with these a lot of very point blank graphics. Silence equals death. In other words, if you're not going to talk about it, more people are going to die from it. And the pink triangle is a reference to the symbol that the Nazis made homosexuals wear, in the same way that they made Jews wear the yellow Star of David. So it was just kind of a statement of the gay community recognizing the symbol and recognizing that they needed to speak up or act up, as they called it. Here's another one. You may recognize this Keith Haring style. Ignorance equals fear, silence equals death, fight AIDS, act, act up. In other words, do something and talk about it. If people aren't willing to talk about this, we'll never get the research, we'll never get the cure for it. And again, the government has blood on its hands. An AIDS death every half hour. So again, the use of printmaking as a political vehicle, as a communication vehicle, get the word out, say what you want to say, and then these were wheat pasted around the city. And again, in major cities, you still see a lot of wheat pasted screen prints. It's a way to communicate. So I now am going to move into our current pandemic, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we're going to be looking at now is current art that artists are making as an expression of their feelings and their thoughts about the pandemic and how it's been treated. So the images I'm going to be showing you are from the Rotland Press in Detroit. So this is very close to home. It is a letterpress and bookmaking studio in Detroit. And they started during the pandemic to put out small, regularly printed books that had artists' work, whether it be like graphic novel artists, people's essays, people's woodcuts and lithographs, and all printmakers. What printmakers, I shouldn't say all printmakers and graphic artists, what they had to say about the pandemic. Sue Coe is a contemporary printmaker. She does do a lot of political work. You can see here, she has on the left the MAGA doctor. It's kind of borrowing that old bubonic plague imagery of the face mask. It looks like a beak, and it shows that all these masked people who are in various emotional states of illness, those grasshoppers flying down, kind of reminder of plague again. So she did write an essay for one of the Rotland Press COVID-19 reviews, and she contributed her artwork. So I'm going to be going through again, some more graphic images. Open your eyes and stare at the eclipse. If I get it, you get it. I'm not talking about it, just about the anxiety and the fear. Again, some commentary, labor camp reports, going to school, going to learn, going to get sick. Just different. These are all contemporary practicing artists. And their vehicle is the Plague Review out of Detroit, Rotland Press. And some like comic art, graphic novels, more interviews of artists. More artwork. I have several images here because especially during last winter when COVID was so strong in our minds, it was just very interesting for me to find a a printed work of art that was so close to home. But I'm going to move on to another artist. This is Walton Ford, and I thought that this was apropos to the subject matter because this is an etching Pestvogel, and this is, again, and when you look at all the colors and realize this is an etching, this is kind of like Japanese woodblock printing, you need a copper plate for every color. And then when you print them one after another, you have to make sure that the registration is exact. So whenever you see any type of fine art printmaking and there's a lot of colors there, you can immediately know this is as much work as a black and white print times as many colors as you see. And then you have to register it. Well, it's not just a matter of making 4 blocks or 5 plates, but making sure that you print them all exactly in the same place. We call that registration. When you first look at this, it just looks like a bunch of greedy birds eating blackberries. These are Bohemian waxwings. And they've come out to eat the blackberries off the thorns, but then when you look, the thorns are turning into barbed wire. So it just makes for a very unsettling image of danger. There was, during the medieval plagues, there was a kind of a folklore that whenever flocks of Bohemian waxwings would come out, they were predicting that there would be another outbreak of the plague. And that's why these birds began being called Pestvogel, Bohemian waxwings. And Europeans did observe too that often before there was a comet or a plague, and even before World War I, it was observed great flocks of these birds would come through the air and land and eat crops. So another plague image, even though it's very subtle. And you also notice that these orange and yellow diagonals are meant to show comets. You know, again, another phenomenon that's frightening to humankind, things that just appear out of nowhere, kind of like disease. So all in all, you have just a beautiful etching and these otherwise beautiful birds, kind of a premonition of disaster. Another contemporary artist, Shepard Fairey, you may be aware of him, who is the designer of a Barack Obama campaign poster. He also is doing a series of COVID posters, this one related to masking. Again, these are posters that are silk screened, so they can be mass produced and then wheat pasted around a city, around a community, so people can see them. Again, you can take silkscreen classes at the KIA. Silkscreen is one of the printmaking disciplines where it's a little easier to do multicolored work because of the screen. You can always slightly see through and predict where your color is going to land. We've never at the KIA done a big, like a citywide wheat pasting project or anything like that. But it's very common for silkscreen artists to, as a way of putting their artwork out there. Again, a contemporary artist. And I want to close up with some contemporary artists that were actually from the KIA doing work here. This is a plastic plate lithograph done by Kelly Vanderplay. She's a local artist. She teaches graphic arts at the Van Buren Tech Center. And this was her comment on the pandemic closing restaurants. Again, with lithography, you could put in a lot of detail because in this case, it was done on a plastic plate and you can draw directly on the plastic plate. Although I do want to draw your attention to the fact, as with almost all printmaking, you're always working in reverse because whenever you print, you're getting the mirror image off of your original plate. So another thing to look for in prints, if you see writing, you can appreciate the fact that the artist did all of that writing backwards so that it would print correctly and be legible. So there's a lot of beautiful detail here in the empty restaurant by a very local artist. And this is another one she did back to school, and it's showing the lonely child going into an abandoned school, the school bus. So this is a local artist and her commentary using printmaking on the COVID-19 situation. So kind of bringing it close to home. And that is the end of printmaking and pandemic up till now, with artwork right up until last fall. So if there are any questions on anything you saw, I'd be happy to answer.
Wonderful. Deb, thank you so much. Would you like me to stop screen sharing for you, or did you maybe want to reference something?
If I might need to reference something, if people
Okay.
ask about it. Yeah, I'm still screen sharing, but I think I clicked out of.
Yeah, it's we can see the side screens. Paula says excellent and informative. So thank you so much, Deb. Everyone, this is the part where we would like to invite you, if you have got any questions or any comments, that you can unmute yourself to ask a question, share a thought. You can also feel free to type it into the chat box and I will read it out loud. I particularly enjoyed the print of the skeleton playing bones during the plague. That was really cool. And I also very much appreciated how you gave us that message of people have been through this before and made it through, and lots of creative things have come. Another comment in the box, wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, not to make light of the current situation. I know it's easy to say, well, people have gone through this before, so don't worry about it. What these artists show is that, yeah, people have been through this before and it's caused a lot of misery and heartache. And so it's not to be taken lightly.
Yeah, absolutely not. But I just think it's a very interesting way to think about history and to think about how our predecessors have lived through lives before us. And I also, when you were showing the like 8 plague scenes of London, I was also thinking about how you know, a visual history of what London used to look like before London's fire. So
yeah, that's right. And that's with all these artist images, you not only see what they thought about pandemic, but also you get a glimpse of everything else in the world looked like, because that was just the backdrop.
yeah.
So I would just add as a reminder to everyone that the Kirkman Art School, the printmaking department, teaches all the printmaking mediums you've seen in this ArtBreak. So if you have ever thought you'd want to try lithography or wood engraving or etching, that is all taught here. You can certainly try those things with workshops or classes. And then you can make your own pandemic statements.
I did take beginning printmaking last fall and I really enjoyed it. Yes, so registration is open right now, and the printmaking offers, we've got beginning printmaking. So if you've never tried it, there's your introduction, intermediate printmaking, block printing, screen printing basics, which is no prior experience needed, including intermediate screen printing, intro to lithography, and a variety of different ones, the unique print. And then if you wanted to make something very festive and fun, gel card or gel plate printmaking, gel plate card making, which is just a Saturday workshop, but you could make your own holiday or winter cards using jelly plate, which is maybe one of the newer kinds of printmaking techniques.
It's a lot of fun too. And it's not about drawing so much as pattern and color. So it's a great introduction if you feel nervous about your drawing skills, although you shouldn't. Gel plate printmaking is a lot of fun for people.
Yeah, I really want to try that. Maybe I'll sign up for the card class. Oh, and then it looks like you're doing a Gyotaku workshop as well. Sort of fish printing.
Yes.
So if you're in Michigan and you know any fishing Michiganders, they might really like a fish print. And also, I think you can come and do some demos every now and then and see examples, not at every art hop, but at some art hops. Deb is out there on Friday nights, right? Weren't you out there last Friday?
Yes, and something that we're also starting in September is that one Friday evening a month, we're doing a free demo in the printmaking studio. And we'll be putting that on our Facebook page. And hopefully we'll get onto the KIA's social media. But for example, in the third Friday in September, we're doing tiny stamp making, which is just carving tiny stamps out of erasers. And then every month going forward, it will probably be the second Friday of every month. Friday evening, we'll be having a free demo in the print shop. So you can come right in, see the equipment, get an example of the kind of things you can do there.
Yeah, that's so fun. Faye says, thank you very much. Very interesting. And now I'm going to remember this stamps. That sounds very interesting to me. And then Deb, you run a print studio, Gunplane Press, correct?
That's just my personal print studio, Sherry.
So how can our viewers see more of your work?
I have a website. It's deborahmatson.com.
Yeah, so anybody that is with us today, deborahmatson.com, I will type it into the chat box and you can go and see Deborah's work. Of course, she's been showing work by other printmakers, but she's an incredibly talented printmaker, and you can see her work. And if you're interested, I highly encourage taking a class with her. I really enjoyed it, and I am still maybe going to sign up. I haven't decided what works for me yet, but and then she's also teaching another workshop called Chinese Threadbook as a one-day studio, and I'm very excited. I'm definitely taking that. So, all right. Well, we have had some nice comments. Oh, and Emily says, and she has a piece in the museum currently. Yes, that is the piece that is on display in the West Michigan Area Show. So if you haven't seen West Michigan Area Show yet, it's basically almost the very first thing you see. You walk into the studio or you walk into the gallery and there's a pedestal with, I don't want to describe it incorrectly, Deb.
It is an artist's book. It is plastic plate lithography. It's a series of self-portraits that fold up into a discarded makeup compact. The overall message is meant to be about environmental responsibility. What we can do is, what do we do or what we fail to do as people. You know, we all love to point fingers, but the fact that there's a mirror there and a self-portrait, the message is that if you want to make a change, be the change.
Yeah. And that won an award from Ninth Wave Studio for alternative media, which congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
And so, yes, definitely come and check that out if you haven't gotten a chance to see the West Michigan Area Show yet, or even if you have, it's only open till September 12th. And then we will have to say goodbye to that wonderful exhibition. If there aren't any comments or thoughts from the audience, I think that we could get ready to say goodbye to one another. Deb, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I thank everyone for being here, and I hope it's piqued your interest in printmaking and also help you understand a little bit more about the history of art and how artists work and contribute to society.
Yes, definitely. And such a variety of ways that a print can look. Well, everyone, it has been a wonderful Art Break at Home with our special guest, Deborah Matson, for Printmaking and Pandemic Part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that we will see you next week for our Artful Evening with Barry Bauman. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Bye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.